Hello, and welcome to a continuation of a theme. Really, it is a continuation of a theme. It's a different theme, though, in many respects. It wasn't just Churchill. That's the point I'm going to be making. And as I'm away for another week, and as this is my office away from home, I'm going to change the angle just a tad. It's rare you find a t-shirt which both has a great band on and your initials. And your dad's initials. I'm going to do some more. Now, I have actually prepped 6 of these. Possibly 7, depending on how you count and do the maths. And so you could get a lot, but I am going to be recording them while I am course directing for Justin Craig of the company. So basically, if I get the free time, I will record them. So the number which are recorded entirely depends on the behavior of the 50 or so teenagers I am responsible for. Can't see where any of this can go wrong, can you? There you go. Let's go in. So, the first one. Well, I've got the Battle of the Bull Run up here, the first Battle of the Bull Run, and well, let's consider this. Very simple idea. Smash the Confederacy by taking the most direct route. Take out its capital. And its center of industry and economics, in many ways. One small issue, and it's really just a small issue. It's also the most obvious plan to do. The idea is quite simple. Washington is here. Richmond is here. March. No, we know in reality it's sort of... Washington will be up sort of here, and Richmond will be down, sort of there, but, you know, it works. But it doesn't really. And the most interesting stat that you have from the whole battle is that both sides bring roughly 35,000 troops. And only have about 18,000 of them engaged. On top of that, the Union has a whole nother army of between 14 and 18,000, so let's say roughly 15,000 probably available, who don't get involved as well. So you can argue, quite simply, that the Union has roughly 50,000 troops within range and use less than 20,000 of them. And the Confederates have 35,000 roughly, well, 33,000 roughly, let's say, troops engaged, and uses 18,000 of them. The Union will suffer 2,708 casualties and losses. Of those, 481 are killed, 1,000 are wounded, and 1,200 are missing. The Confederacy, 387 killed, nearly 1,600 wounded, and 13 missing. It will in many ways make the names of the likes of Beauregard, Jackson, and Johnston, and it will destroy the reputations of McDowell and Patterson. A quick overview of the battle is this. In July 1861, the Union's forces were slowly positioning themselves about 30 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. on the direct route to Richmond. They took so long to position themselves that the Confederates were actually able to bring in reinforcements by rail. McDowell had actually advised against leading his troops. He felt they were unseasoned, untrained, and unready. He also thought he had been lumbered with a load of political officers who, frankly, were useless in charge of his battalions. Now, here is the problem. If you are taking two relatively untrained forces against each other, and technically unequal considering the Union in theory has 50,000 troops, of which a large chunk are positioned and never used because they are securing something. Let's be honest, later in the war, if Grant had had an army, or Sherman had had an army, or even Rosecrans had an army nearby, which wasn't doing anything, and were just standing there while he was going to fight a pitched battle, there would have been a huge ruckus going on. A huge ruckus. As it was, Bull Run matters. Because it illustrates the whole problem with the war from the perspective of both sides. The Union forces hadn't expected any resistance, really. They'd come marching down. They thought the Confederacy wasn't really popular. They weren't really going to have the troops. It was just the elites. And they weren't really popular, and no one was going to really fight them. And they'd come along and they'd show off their steel and they'd win. The Confederacy thought that because they had quite well-organized, trained militias, well, if you have a rather large slave population in your areas, you have to have a fairly strong militia, just in case of rebellion, and other weapons, that they were the stronger military power. Population-wise, the Union has far more numbers, but it's using those numbers, as this battle shows. So the concept the whole way through is a sensible one. Go take Richmond, take it quickly, you'll knock the Confederacy out the war. It's the quick option compared to the Anaconda plan. It's not really the sensible option, but it's the quick option. The reason it's not the sensible option is because you don't have those trained militias to call on. And whilst the Confederate troops aren't really that much better trained than the Union troops, especially after all McDowell's been putting into them, they have been cohesive units for longer, which means they have a sustained and sensible command structure. And they know their officers. They know their men. And they are on the defensive. if you have two equally bad forces and you bring roughly equal numbers to bear, especially if you're bringing them to bear piecemeal, as the Union manage, because of those problems, you lose. But the reason this battle's good, as I said earlier, and is useful, is it illustrates the hold issues from the beginning. Because even at this stage in the war, when they are calling on their militias, the Union has 50,000 troops within that area. The nicest way, the same problems, which meant that the Union got defeated here, meant that the Confederates couldn't advance. Yes, those 14 to 18,000 troops, let's say roughly 15,000 troops, which were Patterson's command, they could have been useful in the fight, but they weren't there. But the fact that they were holding their position meant that, in the nicest way, even if the Confederates win, what are they going to do? How are they going to advance? Because the same factors which just worked against the Union winning are going to work against them winning if they advance. Adds that, let's be honest, whilst they're disorganized and in a terrible, terrible mess, McDowell still has 32,000 troops. So again, the Confederates won. The Union still has a lot more troops. And this is the point, really. At a certain point, numbers start to wear. At a certain point, the forces that survive will start to get more efficient and train more. Yes, the Confederacy is starting from a marginally higher average in terms of training experience, but war rapidly overtakes that because the Unions is starting with a far bigger industrial base, far more troops, and their own militias, and they get a very large chunk of the experienced army. They don't get everyone, but they do get a large chunk of the experienced army, which goes into training. And what's especially crucial is they get a very large chunk of the army's experienced NCOs. Now, there are going to be lots of people sitting there going, why does that matter? Well, quite simple. Who trains troops to become infantrymen? Is it an officer or an NCO? Or cavalry? Officers lead, but it's the NCOs which produce the backbone of the army. It's the NCOs which produce the army. And whilst, yes, there were officers who had divided loyalties, and there were a few NCOs, it was far, far less NCOs went Confederate than officers. And that was critical, because the Union Army, as it comes to be, is in many ways built around those experienced NCOs. The veteran NCOs who returned to the colours, and the NCOs who have served, who were serving and continue to serve. More importantly, what's interesting here is the Confederacy are making use of the railways. It shows how important the railways are to logistics and movement, which is going to be true for the war going on. But the Confederacy has a far less integrated, far less sustainable railway network than the Union does because of its industrial base. So when they're able to use it, it's great and allows them with internal lines of communication to really take advantage of that and try and maximize their forces available. But it doesn't happen for that long, and it doesn't keep it up, whereas the Union managed to maintain it. So the point is always with these is crackpot schemes or good ideas badly executed, and there are multiple levels here. There is the crackpot scheme that is the Confederacy. Honestly, it was all on a wing and a prayer and all on a hope that the Union would accept it as a fait accompli. That they would just give in. That they would just recognize them and move on. It's a nice idea in theory, but in practice it was never going to happen. The American dream, the American ideal was not built that way. It was built to be inclusive, i.e., once you're part of it, you're not getting out of it. Not exclusive. They wanted the United States of America, not the divided States of America. Not the some states of America and other states of America. They wanted the United States of America. Remember, there are a fair number of Americans who were advocating continuing the expansion of the United States and taking not just Canada, but going down through Mexico and into South America. The whole of it. So, with that strong strand running through American society, in certain places, certain people being very loud about it, it's unlikely they're going to accept a division. But then there's another crackpot scheme here. The Union way of war. You see consistently generals having their careers ruined. In the case of McClellan, should never have actually been in the post, because lots of people look at a map and go, oh, it's this distance between Washington and Richmond. March! That is some of the most inhospitable terrain to actually mounting an attack. It just is. It's got hills, it's got deep rivers, it's got all sorts of natural obstacles and ridgelines that you can defend in that distance. It's doable, but at what cost? And that is the point. It's at what cost? Now, whilst we can all agree that McDowell was taking his sweet time getting his force ready, but the point is that actually, if you were being sensible, time worked for the Union. It allowed them to mass their strength. A little bit more time, and you'd have had thousands of more troops there. After the Battle of Bull Run, they're very scared in Washington that they're going to, the Confederates are going to advance. As I've said earlier, there's no chance of them doing, because the same things that just worked against the Union would work against the Confederates. But then brigades of troops from other states start to arrive in Washington. They were already on train, they were already en route. If they'd waited a few weeks, those troops could have been part of the force integrated. And those few more weeks could have given could have given him, McDowell, the time he needed to actually get his forces ready and to carry out this attack. And he could have had a fight which he could have won. Now, who's to blame for this? Can you put Lincoln to blame for it? Seward? Any of the various political agitators, all of whom presumed they knew the way better than anyone else? Not really. The Crackpot scheme turns up to many people who are just looking at a nice flat map, like this. You look at a flat map, everything looks lovely. Go and actually walk the ground. You realize the difference. So this one, the Battle of Bull Run, and the whole Confederacy experiment, let's call it, crackpot scheme or badly executed? Both. For both. Confederacy is badly executed because honestly they should have, if they'd really been planning on it, have probably tried to play a delaying action for a little bit longer and build up their infrastructure a lot more. Yes, they were worried about Lincoln being in the presidency, but honestly, Lincoln wasn't likely to do much. He was very conservative in his approach to these things. He was radical compared to some of his predecessors, but he was conservative in his approach and how he managed his politics. Buying their time for a little longer could have got them a lot further, a lot quicker. What they needed was more infrastructure, and what they needed was definitely infrastructure which linked New Orleans to Richmond, Virginia, directly. They needed a rail line that did that and did that smoothly, that they could maintain and support. Because they had a lot of north-south, but they didn't have much east-west communications without the use of the sea. The other thing they could have done is create a few shipping firms which just happened to buy some very, very fast ships. But perhaps it's good that they didn't, because that meant they had less of a chance. And even if they had, they still would have had mountains to climb to overcome the resource differences between them and the Union. On the Union side, okay, it's a plan. It's arguably a good plan, but it's terribly executed. And that's why it ends up with a Battle of Bull Run. Terribly executed. So what have we got coming up? Well, Brewship 55 is the 22nd of August, apparently. And the 15th of August is Brewship's Special Questions What Ifs Till the Brew Runs Out, because I will literally have been back from this teaching for a few hours, possibly a bit longer by the time it starts. So, yeah, I'm not putting books together, but I will answer questions and chat you all. I have tried to set up a hardwire connection here and have that working, and it's failed every single time. So, no. Sorry. I know. Hope you enjoyed these 20 odd minutes. They're supposed to be roughly 15 minutes. This one's turned into 25. And thank you again to everyone who listens to these things and talks about them. As the same rule's going to apply. From each of the 3 sets, the one which has had the most comments on, I will at some point turn into a live discussion and do a full set of slides on going through. These are supposed to be quick 1-slide intros. He says it's turning into 25, 26 minutes. It's supposed to be 15 minutes maximum. Sorry. Take care, and thank you for watching.